History of Linwood. By orders from the Georgia General Assembly, Edward Lloyd Thomas was sent to the falls on the Chattahoochee River to survey land on which to raise a town on the outskirts of the southern frontier. He brought along with him his son Truman to help with the survey. The year 1828 was born into a bitter winter and, as the harsh months wore on, young Truman fell ill. He succumbed to the cold and passed away on March 26 in the wilderness of what would become the neighborhood known as Linwood. Grief-stricken, the father buried the son. And the survey took a turn. Reluctant to wander too far away from his child's resting place, Edward spent the next month roaming the area around his loss. The 4 acres would eventually become Columbus' first cemetery, with Truman at its center. While it remains unknown where the young man was buried and there is no memorial to mark his plot, the entire cemetery is itself a monument to him, for had Truman not fallen, there would have been no Linwood. The city cemetery, as Linwood was once known, is the oldest institution of the Columbus city government, written into the city plan the very year of its first interment. Though the earliest marked graves are 1829, 1 year after Columbus was laid out, burials were left unrecorded in the old cemetery, located atop the oak-lined hill. Families would simply choose their ground and bury their own. By 1845, a system had been implemented by which lots were plotted outside the old cemetery and receipts of sale were recorded, but with the sexton presenting his list of burials on a monthly or quarterly basis without the records being compiled in a ledger until 1866, the records from this period are currently incomplete. However, at this very moment, the sexton's documents are actively being unearthed and digitized. This noble effort on behalf of the Linwood residents who have until now been hidden to history will at last honor those lost men and women for their contributions and sacrifice, and restore the part they played in laying the foundation that rose Columbus from the small outpost it was into the bustling mill town it was to become. The city cemetery took the name it stands with today in 1894, when the fashionable neighborhood that surrounded it took its name from a novel by Caroline Lee Hentz, who had spent a brief period of time in Columbus. The novel was titled Ernest Linwood. Ever since then, Linwood Cemetery has been more than just a memorial garden, more than just iron markers and marble headstones. Linwood Cemetery is a repository of Columbus history. To walk among its plots is to plot the financial, social, and spiritual growth of our city by the falls. So share a day with us, and we will share our past with you. Notable residents. 1. J. W. Davis Woodman of the World Marker, having been a member of the fraternal insurance organization Woodman of the World. J. W. Davis received the stylized tree trunk headstone associated with the fraternity's legacy. 2. Confederate Soldiers, 2 sections of Linwood, on both the southeast and southwest corner, are dedicated to the many men who died in Columbus hospitals during the war between the states. 3. Louie Haman, originally from the Polish province of Posen, this Jewish tinsmith forged swords for the Confederacy during the war, and agricultural apparatus afterward. 4. Tabitha Lamar. Tabitha was the wife of Mirabeau Lamar, the man who not only founded the Columbus Inquirer, but also served as the 2nd president of the Texan Republic, following the term of Sam Houston. 5. Drive. Francis Ore Tickner, a full-time physician and part-time poet, Tickner wrote the Civil War poem Little Giffen. 6. Drive. Edwin L. de Griffinried, a physician and city commissioner, de Griffinried played an instrumental role in the early planning of Columbus, even choosing the river bluff on which the town was placed. 7. Thomas Gilbert, both a printer and a newspaper editor for The Sun, Gilbert is responsible for the first history of Columbus. 8. Fishburne Lot. This lot presents a fine example of the intricate cast iron fences erected to enclose family plots. 9. William H. Young. During the mid-1800s, Young was one of Columbus' most prominent businessmen, responsible for starting the Eagle and Phoenix Mills. 10. Drive. John S. Pemberton, a pharmacist who was wounded in the last land battle of the Civil War here in Columbus. Pemberton would go on to concoct the secret formula to Coca-Cola. 11. Chapel Family Lot. The Chapels were a family filled with civic pride, with A. H. Chapel serving as congressman in the 1840s, L. H. Chapel as 6th-term mayor, and Miss Loretto Columbus' most beloved librarian. 12.
12. H.
Augusta Howard. As the woman who founded Georgia's Women's Suffrage Association, Howard's headstone is emblazoned with the word martyr.
13.
Lizzie Rutherford Ellis. Lizzie was the leader of a local group of ladies who established the observance of Confederate Memorial Day, a practice that spread throughout the South in which every April 26 the graves of fallen Confederate soldiers were decorated.
14. John Winter, an antebellum industrialist, former mayor, and staunch Unionist. Winter fled his homeland in 1861, but requested that his body be brought back to Columbus for burial.
15. Margaret Traylor. This woman's grave bears the image of an obelisk and willow tree in a single icon, a symbol believed to have traveled to Charleston, South Carolina from Germany before finding its way to Linwood in 1849. 16. Jones Benninglot. This family plot is occupied by Seaborn Jones, a lawyer in the early days of Columbus and the builder of the St. Elmo Mansion, and his son-in-law Henry L. Benning, himself a lawyer as well as the Confederate general from which Fort Benning took its name. 17. Garrett Lott. Memorialized by one of the tallest obelisks in Linwood Cemetery, L.F. Garrett at one time served as Speaker of Georgia House of Representatives and was responsible for developing the Waracoba neighborhood around Lake Bottom Park. 18. James Warner, a naval engineer who oversaw the Confederate Navy yard in which the ironclad CSS Muskogee was constructed. Warner was accidentally killed in a row between locals and black federal troops during Reconstruction. 19. W.C. Bradley, one of the most prominent names in Columbus. Bradley was a jack of all trades, an industrialist, a wholesale merchant, and an investor who served as chairman of the board for Coca-Cola for over 20 years. 20. Johnny Pearl Patrick Johnson, the mother of Hollywood screenwriter Nunnally Johnson. Johnny was a driving force in Columbus' educational development, founding the local PTA organization and becoming the first woman to serve on the school board.
In honor of her achievements, her name was given to Johnson School.
21. Noble Leslie Devotee, a Baptist minister and newspaper editor. Devotee was the main contributing founder of the Sigma Alpha Epsilon fraternity, the first national fraternity to be established in the Deep South.
22. Brig.
General Paul J. Semmes, a local businessman and one-time president of the Coweta Falls Textile Mill. Semmes answered the call of duty but fell on the field of battle at Gettysburg. 23. Tom Houston, both an inventor and artistic photographer, Houston was the creative force behind Tom's Peanuts. 24. Georgia Mustian, one of the most elaborate headstones in Linwood Cemetery. This memorial to a 25-year-old married woman features a sleeping child overlooked by a dove beneath an arch of rose blossoms. 25. Francis Joseph Springer, a local grocer who took his savings and invested it in the construction of the theater that would bear his name, the Springer Opera House.
The Lamas Chapel.
The relocation, restoration, and preservation of the historic Lamas Chapel to Linwood Cemetery here in Columbus, Georgia began as so many things do in our town, over scrambled dogs at Dinglewood Pharmacy.
Ed Loomis had long been concerned with the safeguarding of the small church, recalling a quote his grandfather included in the last letter he wrote to his sons: "Don't forget the little chapel, when you're beautifying your own houses."
One of the great complaints of the prophets was that while the people lived in sealed houses they permitted God's house to go to waste. Ed resolved to heed his elders' instructions, and so met with Pat Walters and Clarson Kyle in 2004 about moving the chapel to Linwood Cemetery, and by late 2005, the house of worship was officially donated to the historic Lynwood Foundation. Having served in the New York militia during the Civil War, raising a cotton gin manufacturing company in Connecticut, and then selling it, Franklin Hadley Lummis moved his family to Columbus and bought the W.G. Clemens, Brown, and Company gin manufacturer in 1869. 2 years later, he moved the company to a 1,600 acres patch of land in Juniper, Georgia. This move was made to ensure that his workers would not be led astray by Columbus' rough element. To make certain his men worked and lived with virtuous hearts, he then erected this chapel to provide non-denominational church services, its first pastor being a Methodist Episcopal minister. Relocated to Columbus from Juniper in April of 2007, the official ribbon-cutting ceremony occurred on April 24, 2008. In its new life here at Linwood Cemetery, the chapel provides a number of novel services, including the capacity to be rented for weddings, funerals, meetings, and family reunions.
At 24 by 48 feet, the building has ample space for your function.
Included in Lamas' gift of the small church was the pulpit, the pews, a table for church records, all of which were hewn from heart pine, the original floors, lovely stained glass windows, and a century-old Edmund Cole upright grand piano. Fitted with a 38-foot bell tower which houses a bell said to have been cast in Philadelphia around the time of the chapel's construction, this little building overflows with historic charm and offers a respite from these bustling times with memories of a quieter past. There could be no more appropriate place for this historic chapel to finally come to rest, for though it has moved to a new home, it is back among family. Also at rest in Linwood Cemetery is a number of people who grew up within its walls. Buried here are Ezra Frank Lamas and his wife Julia I. Went, along with her mother Eliza Went, his brother Louie E. Lamas and his wife Josephine Went, and Lamas' great-grandfather Franklin Edward Lamas and his wife Fanny Berry Lamas. At over 100 years of age, this small chapel has given much joy in times of celebration and offered much solace in times of pain. With its relocation and restoration here in Linwood Cemetery, it is poised to give of itself 100 more. So come experience the simple pleasure of this small but wondrous building, and let its story become a chapter in yours.
Stone carvers of Linwood.
Stone carving is the oldest example of representational art in the world, predating our very civilization. From the Venus of Barakat to Michelangelo's David, Stone Mountain to Mount Rushmore, human hands have sought to break, chisel, rasp, and polish wonder and solace from stone.
There is perhaps no more humble, yet soul-stirring, example of stone carvings as those found in cemeteries, their marble slabs marking lives lived and lost.
Linwood is no exception, boasting an abundance of stone-carved monuments, each with the personal touch of its maker's hands. Having been consecrated in the 19th century, a time when stone carving had ceased to be an idle art and had become a lifetime profession, Linwood Cemetery's first 50 years were a remarkable period in artistry. At that time, there were a number of artisans plying their trade at Linwood Cemetery. Most centered their businesses in Columbus, but all hailed from the Emerald Isle, each signing their work upon completion. The first two Linwood carvers who signed their stones were Patrick Adams and John Madden. Adams was settled in Columbus by 1832, and with the help of contacts within the city council had established himself as a tradesman.
Not only was he skilled at carving grave markers, he also applied his trade toward laying bricks in sewers and the construction of the new city market.
Some years later, in the early 1840s, Madden arrived with a posse of stonecutters, 7 strong. Not long after, Adams and Madden pooled their resources together and formed a team. Several monuments bearing both men's signatures shows the extent of their collaboration. The mid-1850s saw ground break on 2 new marble works, one by Thomas Kenny and the other by Henry Mccauley. Kenny was at that time 63 years of age, so he brought along with him his 3 sons and a slew of stonecutters. Several monuments scattered throughout the cemetery bear the signatures of Kenny and his son George. But of all the carvers to have hewn stone into headstones, the most prolific, and arguably the most gifted, is Henry Mccauley. At age 28, Mccauley took residence at a local boarding house with a number of other stonecutters, and in time became Linwood's own artist, producing not only the most signed stones in the memorial garden, but also leaving behind the most museum-worthy monuments. He died an untimely death in 1880 and is himself buried in Linwood Cemetery, his gravestone caringly carved by Columbus then Assistant Marshal Thomas Greer. While Mccauley's marker is the only one signed by Greer, it is believed that he was a devoted sculptor in Mccauley's marble yard. Further works of interest include a stone signed by the famous Robert E. Launitz, one of 3 of the New York carver's pieces known to be in Georgia. Local stonecutters gleaned ideas and patterns from his marble work designs as seen in catalogues of the day. Other 19th century signed monuments on display in Linwood Cemetery worth noting included works by Carey of Boston, Goddess of Baltimore, Gow of Augusta, and Cassoni and Isola of New York.
The Lynwood Foundation.
Historic Lynwood Foundation Incorporated was founded in 1997. It was the result of an effort by the Lizzie Rutherford chapter of the United Daughters of the Confederacy to form a Friends of Linwood Cemetery in order to focus attention on the care of the historic cemetery, long neglected by the city. Their first public meeting drew so many enthusiastic, concerned citizens that a full-blown private, non-profit corporation was established, with 18 members on its board of directors. An executive director was hired and work was systematically begun to survey the lots, to restore and repair some sites, and to fulfill its mission. Linwood Cemetery is owned by the City of Columbus, Georgia. The board quickly developed a memorandum of understanding with the city defining the responsibilities of each group, so that the foundation could restore and maintain the cemetery in partnership with the city, the sexton and staff. Mission statement: to preserve and maintain Linwood Cemetery as a historic and cultural site of importance to the City of Columbus and its citizens, to assist the City of Columbus in restoring, preserving, improving, maintaining, and managing Linwood Cemetery, and to educate the public with respect to the cultural and historic values of Linwood Cemetery, and for other educational and charitable purposes.